numbers up. And I think a lot of you are going to be surprised at what you learn here in this section. This is the map. This one got a lot of recognition here in the last week. You may have seen President Trump last week put out a statement discussing my findings, in which I determined that there are a minimum of 8 million excess Biden votes nationally, not just in swing states or contested states, but based on population trends, registration data, especially when we have party registration information. Now, I promised you guys that there would be some big news about audits in this country, right? Did anybody see that? Okay, does anybody see a very large Republican state down in the bottom of this map, right in the middle, where somebody that might be briefing you dresses like he's from that state, Texas, okay? So I've just received word from Representative Steve Toth, who is the author of the Texas Audits Bill, that our bill will soon have the full endorsement of Governor Greg Abbott. Right, so that is big news. That is big news as we have this effort ongoing to find out just what happened in our 2020 election. Okay, the first point that I'm going to bring up, and of course the media will try to tell you, the media is going to try and tell you that bellwethers are not predictive. Okay, but what I'm going to show you is cause for concern that should cause anybody with a brain and the ability to put this information together to want to dig a bit deeper. So a bellwether is a leading indicator of a final election outcome.
Not really. Maybe a little
These counties here that I'm going to show you, there are 19 counties since 1980 that have been perfect in aligning with the winner of our presidential elections. In 2016, President Trump carried all 19 of these counties. You can see most of them are in your working class states in the Northeast. There's also 4 of them in Wisconsin. And President Obama carried all 19 in both of his campaigns all the way back to 1980. They've aligned with the winner. President Trump carried 18 of the 19 in 2020, with the exception of one in Washington, which I can assure you, and for those of you in the Washington delegation here, you already know Clallam County, Washington has some issues. So President Trump, once again, carries the bellwether counties of 2020 and somehow has not won this election. So it doesn't stop at counties. Bellwethers can also be states. Is anybody familiar with some famous bellwether states? Okay, I heard Ohio, I heard Florida. So Ohio's been perfect all but twice since 1896. But I can make that a bigger coalition for you when we're talking about bellwether states in a big group. Here's Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. Since 1896, these 4 states have been won by the same candidate on 13 occasions, and on all 13 occasions, they've gone to the winner of the election, whether elected for the first time or re-elected. President Trump carried all 4 of these states in 2016 and carried all 4 again in 2020. So why does this matter? Those 4 states represent a strong coalition of voters because our founders created the Electoral College system to encourage coalition building. Otherwise, we would just be one giant electoral map between New York City, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Los Angeles looking for a popular vote win. These 4 states have urban, suburban, rural, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, every sort of voter demographic that you could possibly look for. And that shows that President Trump had a strong grasp on the overall electorate. Point number 3, share a primary vote. Who in here votes in primaries? Okay, primary voters are typically your dedicated voters, no matter whether we're talking about Democrats or Republicans or anyone, really. These are your folks that are directing the party on platforms and making sure that the best candidates, well, hopefully making sure that the best candidates are the ones that are being nominated. There is a very strong predictor here that has to do with turnout. Right now, the only arguments I hear against my points are COVID and high turnout. There are statistics that suggest where candidate turnout levels should be. So I'm going to show you 4 presidents here. Since primaries were introduced in 1912, these are the 4 presidents who ran in a primary and lost the subsequent general election. And the percentage you see here is the percentage of primary vote each of these men received. Hoover with 36, all the way over to Bush 41, who had 72.8% of the primary vote. A low number in the primary suggests that the base is not fully behind you. So if you remember George Bush losing in 92, he had a serious primary challenge, and even with a number like 73%, quite a bit higher than these other three, he was weakened going into the election against Bill Clinton, and of course he lost. So these are your 4 presidents since the primaries began who lost the election. On the contrary, these are 3 Republican presidents, and these are landslides in the general election, okay? So not just landslides in the primary. You see their primary vote shares underneath each of their pictures. You have Eisenhower with 86%. He went on to win 41 states in 1956, including Minnesota, right? And then we have Nixon in 72 with 87%. He won 49 states, including, once again, Minnesota. That was the last time Minnesota has certified itself as a Republican state. And then Ronald Reagan with 99% in 1984, and we all remember that election, and I think there was one state he didn't win. Minnesota, okay. So there's some issues there as well. But these are numbers that show you a strong Republican candidate in a general election. So 86, 87, 99%, those are some examples. Does anybody know what kind of numbers Donald Trump put up in the 2020 primaries? Okay, so you remember people were pouring out of their houses in the middle of the pandemic to go vote for Donald Trump in primaries. 94%. So look, this is Trump's share of the primary vote with no valid contender to his nomination. 94%. We've never had, since primaries began, we've never had a defeated president with a number higher than 72.8%. This is your enthusiasm number. Okay, so if we want to really reverse things, and you want to argue for high turnout on the other side, which I could show you any coalitions of states when I will, where it's not going to be possible mechanically for both parties to gain significantly. Joe Biden, does anybody remember how he did in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada? He was almost to the bottom of the pile, and his running mate didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses. So you want to talk about a high turnout tandem? I don't think so. Point number 4. So these go back quite a bit further than the points that the media will tell you about. Here's 1892. I doubt any of you were alive in 1892. Okay, I don't see any takers for that. So since 1892, no incumbent president has gained votes and not been reelected. Never has happened since 1892. The reason that is your cutoff date is because you have a slower growth of the union at this point. The states being added are frontier states without significant populations. Before that time, there have been presidents who gained votes because of the growth of the union and not been reelected. Here is, since 1900, you can see the gain in votes from previous election for each of these presidents. Trump on the far right here with over 11 million votes gained. The 2 that are higher, you have Nixon in 72. Okay, what happened in 1968, you had a significant third-party challenger who took electoral votes and split the votes up. So you have much more to come over for Nixon in 72. And then Bush in 2004. 2000 is a very historically low turnout election, and 2004 brought us into a more modernized level of turnout. So you have a slightly higher number for Bush. But Donald Trump's total is way higher than the others on the screen. You even have 3 presidents who have not gained votes, actually 2 different presidents, FDR and Obama in 2012, who lost votes and were still reelected. Obama's loss in votes actually plays into some of the other stuff I'm going to tell you about these working class states and candidates like Mitt Romney. Voter registration by party. Who's heard me talk about registration by party? Extremely predictive. Extremely. It is much more accurate than polls. So why do we have issues with polling? The polarization in the country right now causes serious issues with people wanting to speak to strangers about their political preferences. Maybe not you guys. You'll probably tell anyone what you think, but we're not everybody represented here. Social desirability bias. You know, the old suburban women people talk about. You don't want to talk to a stranger about this, so you wind up with a 43 to 39 poll. 43 plus 39, you know, what do we get? We have another 18% unaccounted for. So how can you even call that a thorough poll? So, but we have registration by party. Does anybody's state register voters by party here?
You want to take the garbage out front?
Hey, any registered Republicans from Texas?
I'll be outside, okay?
Well, you're lying if you say you are, because we don't register by party. So the states that do, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and some others, okay, extremely predictive going back decades, as far back as those records are available. Here's a blurb from Pennsylvania. From 2016 to 2020, just in general, in the 4 years preceding a presidential election, the party that makes gains in registration is the party that performs best the next election. So a Republican state that advances in Republican registration will be more Republican, and this is almost without fail. And the opposite is true. You could see some states that advance in Democrat registration and you get a bigger margin, and this is also true at the county level. In Pennsylvania, from 2016 to 2020, who won Pennsylvania in 2016? Donald Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016. That was predictable because in the 4 years prior to that, the Republicans had a very similar output of net new registrations. Not so from 2008 to 2012. They actually made gains in the registration rolls, but only because the Democrats lost more. The working classes were not interested in Romney, but you still had a 5-point reduction in the Democrat margin of victory. But when the working class Republican came on scene, Donald Trump, you had numbers like this. So for the past 4 years in Pennsylvania, there were 242,000 net new Republican registrations and only 12,000 Democrats, which is a ratio of nearly 21 to 1, suggesting a massive Republican blowout, at least a Trump blowout in Pennsylvania. This is a 4-county sample in Pennsylvania. This is how it works out at the county level. These are 4 very strong Trump counties. So some of the other presenters have discussed their findings, their methodology, and their discipline. So the focus has obviously been on cyber. Mine is at large. Mine can cover any potential issues with election integrity. These 4 counties together from 2016 to 2020, over 50,000 net new Republicans and negative 11,000 Democrat registrations, these 4 counties. But if you look at my numbers, I would estimate that Joe Biden has up to 68,000 excess votes in these 4 counties. We need to understand the political dynamics. This is why it's important to be able to understand it. So you locals that are here, you understand your states. Who's here from Pennsylvania or Michigan? Okay, these 2 states trend perfectly together, and they have trended together without fail since 1932. Pennsylvania goes right, so does Michigan. Pennsylvania goes left, so does Michigan. You may not have known that. But in 2008, the blue lines here, these are the Democrat vote totals by year. 2008 was the peak of the Democratic Party in what we now call the Rust Belt, or the Industrial Midwest. This is President Obama with 8 years of a Republican administration sweeping him into office, with full command of the working classes, all the unions, record minority support, record minority turnout, soft Republicans, pretty much anything that he has at his advantage he was getting. And then you see it, beginning in 2012, this state trended Republican for Mitt Romney, but it wasn't because of Romney. Okay, it was because of the Democrat fallout in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and even beginning in Minnesota. You have a drop in Democrat support, all of these. Very limited Republican gains, if any, in these 4 counties. But then when Trump comes on the scene, you see the Republican vote share take off. And I'm referring to this right here. Look at Luzerne County. Luzerne County is your bellwether of Pennsylvania, has gone to the winner of Pennsylvania in every election since 1936. So Luzerne points to the winner of PA. Any Republican that has carried Luzerne has also carried Michigan since 1936. And then Westmoreland County, population growth matters. Population growth goes hand in hand with new registrations. If you have legitimate registration rolls, you're not likely to see both parties in the middle of a coalition shift growing substantially. But what we see here with these blue lines, this is your projected trend line for Biden based on party registration and Trump growth. The blue line actual is the certified total. So these Republican counties are being won by Trump, but by a much smaller number than projected. And then you have Philadelphia much closer and able to do its thing, because Rudy Giuliani will tell you Philadelphia is the kingpin of election fraud. But it wasn't possible without stuff like this. Pennsylvania and Michigan trend perfectly together. Here's an example statewide for Michigan. Remember what we talked about, 2008. You have the peak of the Democratic Party in the industrial Midwest. Obama's here with a 17-point victory in Michigan in 2008. I'm sure anybody from Michigan remembers that very well. And then what we have here is the falling away of the working classes from the Democratic Party. This is a 300,000 vote loss going into 2012 in Michigan for Obama in his reelection. 4 million votes lost nationally. But because of Mitt Romney's inability to connect with the working classes, you have this flat line here. Not a substantial gain for Mitt Romney, but even so, the margin in Michigan tightens to 9 points. So what I say when I say trend is Michigan began trending more Republican beginning in the midterms of 2010 and into the 2012 presidential election. So when a coalition shift fully comes together, you continue this. This is another 300,000 vote drop for Democrats going into 2016, but this time, the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, has a much more serious vote spike, enough to flip the state. This is a state without a lot of growth going on. This is an area that trended Republican because of trade deals. These are not your typical Southern conservative voters. This is a coalition shift in the Midwest that is working class based. And once a trend like this goes into effect, confirmable by numbers you see in Pennsylvania party registration, very difficult to reverse. You're going to need a completely new political cycle to reverse something like this in this area. And Trump with a 400,000 vote increase in Michigan. So the last election, he gained less than half that number and flipped the state. But this right here is a 500,000 vote increase after 2 consecutive elections of 300,000 votes lost by Democrats in Michigan. Here's your projected trend line, even in a high turnout scenario, state of Michigan. Now you want to know why the Attorney General is threatening people with police activity for questioning the election in Michigan. Look behind me. Here's Macomb County, same story here. Macomb County was won by President Bush in 2004. Pretty strong performance with the working classes, not quite enough to flip the state. And you see the same thing, Obama opening up a large lead there in Macomb County. He has command of the unions, all working class voters, record minority support soft Republicans. And then we have the falling away of the Democratic Party in the region. Okay, this is a real thing, and it's not just Michigan, it's Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, Ohio, Iowa, you name it. And now we have the inversion here when Trump comes on scene. Macomb County is the home of the Reagan Democrat. So the people that put Donald Trump in the White House in 2016 voted for Obama 2 times. People need to understand that. These are oftentimes economic Democrats, people that are still registered as Democrats in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin that made these changes. Now, we see Trump with a record Republican gain in Macomb County of 40,000 votes. So the last election, Trump gained 33,000 votes here. The Democrat column lost 32,000 as a result. Why? A coalition shift is taking voters from one side, and now they're voting for the other, meaning there are fewer voters here. And you see the same thing in reverse against Republicans in Northern Virginia. Amanda, I'm sorry to bring up Virginia like that, but it's true. In Fairfax County, Donald Trump still has fewer votes than George Bush had 16 years ago. That's a coalition shift against Republicans. This is the trend line for Biden in Macomb County. About 145,000 votes based on Trump's performance in the county. Instead, we have 224,000. This is a gap of 70 to 90,000 votes, depending on where your estimate lies in Michigan, in Macomb County. That county needs to be audited. And here are 5 other states, key states that register voters by party. All of these trended Republican, except for Arizona statewide, due to what I believe to be very curious rolls in Maricopa County, but even so, since the presidential primaries, Maricopa County had a 1.3 to 1 registration edge for Republicans. And I spoke to a gentleman earlier today who said that the Republicans now in Arizona are out registering Democrats 4 to 1. So there's a serious surge now for voter registration, understanding the importance of getting people involved in party politics. Number 6, this is a good one. U.S. House elections. Has anybody heard the phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats? So one would think with a large electoral landslide by any party, you could expect down ticket effects to sweep in members of that person's party. Here's a few examples. 1980, Reagan won by 10% popular vote. The Republicans picked up 34 U.S. House seats. This is a time, some of you may remember this, in which Republicans did not have a majority in the House for about 40 years, not until the contract with America in 94 did that change. Reagan re-elected in 84, humongous victory. And they pulled back, Republicans pulled back 16 House seats net that had been lost in the midterms in 82. And then for the sake of including the Democratic Party here in a landslide recently, you have Obama's large 2008 win, 7% popular vote win, brought 21 House seats for Democrats. So let's talk about 2020. How do we think? So 306 electoral votes is pretty impressive. I mean, especially given the level of polarization that we have today, it's not bad. How do we think the Democrats did in the U.S. House in 2020? Minus 13. Not one single Republican House incumbent was defeated. So everyone showed up to vote Republican down ticket to make sure we put a new president in. The trend of Florida. Anybody from Florida here? Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have strong correlation with their working class votes. The next slide I'm going to show you is a little busy, but it could be busier. This trend goes all the way back to 1932. The red and the blue, this represents the party that made gains in those states, not necessarily the party that won. George Bush carried Florida in 88, but I have it in blue because the state went several more points towards Democrats. 8 points exactly. So you have a Republican state, but it trended blue. So likewise, Pennsylvania and Michigan followed Florida. So Florida was my lead indicator on election night. I was watching for a Trump win larger than 1.2%, which would suggest to me, based on 88 years of statistics, that Pennsylvania and Michigan, confirming Pennsylvania's registration trend, would follow behind Florida. And of course, for the first time in 88 years, we had Florida went 2 points more Republican, and Pennsylvania and Michigan backed off to the left. So the trend of Florida has serious correlation to what goes on in the industrial Midwest. This is definitely going to interest you. This is Trump's performance in the battlegrounds. So we could be talking about counties, we could be talking about states. Clearly, in Arizona, we're really talking about one county, although we could certainly make a case for Pima County for a forensic audit as well, and maybe that will happen. When a Republican candidate, when the Republican brand loses steam, and you can see this pretty much as far back as you want to look, you see a flatlining of votes, which usually corresponds with registration data, and then you see a decline in Republican vote shares and then a coalition shift in the opposite direction. Not the gains that President Trump made in 2020. This is Maricopa County. Let me tell you what you're looking at here. You're looking at net votes gained from previous elections. In 2004, George Bush had a record Republican vote gain in Maricopa County of 199,000 votes from 2000. And then John Kerry had 118,000 more than Al Gore did. That is the Democrat record in Maricopa County for new votes gained in one election, 118,000. Barack Obama had 97,000 new votes from Kerry. Then he was flat in 2012. Then Clinton had 101,000 new votes from Obama's 2012 performance. You can see here that Donald Trump carried Maricopa County with fewer votes than Mitt Romney had 4 years prior, still carried the county. Now this year, this is a county that hasn't been Democrat since 1948. 1948, a long time ago. Donald Trump says Republican record vote gain coming in Maricopa County, 248,000 new votes. And then 338,000 net new Biden votes from 2016 to win the state by 10,000. Okay, so this is why, even if you can't put it into words, why there's an audit going on in Maricopa County. Okay. I was just in Georgia last week. You know, the South is great for hospitality. I grew up in the South. Who's from Georgia? I know Candace was here earlier. Anybody from Georgia? No? Okay, so in a Republican stronghold, in a place like Texas or Georgia, a lot of the strength for the Republican Party comes out of suburban counties or exurban counties. These are turning into your new suburbs. You used to have Cobb and Gwinnett were the suburbs of Atlanta. So now they're becoming even more populated, and of course people are spreading out further to counties that are further away. I want you to see the Republican brand when there's not much enthusiasm for it. And you can really see it here you can see it here in the middle. This is 2012, 2016. These 5 counties are ex-urban or suburban Atlanta counties, and these are Republican strongholds. The way the Republicans win Georgia is these counties and the rural areas overwhelm Atlanta, period. And if you ever get to the point where Metro Atlanta overwhelms this, the Democrats do win the state. These counties here, Forsyth, Hall, Cherokee, Paulding, and Coweta, they grew tremendously from 2004 to 2008 from a small number of votes, which is why in 2 of these counties, you do have a higher percentage vote gain than we have for Trump in 2020. But remember, raw votes percentage, there is some change here. But we have Romney. Romney didn't motivate the conservative base. So we have some population growth that leads to vote growth. This is 10% vote gain, 20%, 30%. And then Trump. In states like Georgia, you have the Never Trump coalitions, and I'll show you in Texas, you had the same thing with the Ted Cruz grudge going on in Texas. You see this flat vote share for Trump, even with some population growth, Romney and Trump here. So the year we lose Georgia, the year Donald Trump loses Georgia with a record gain of 373,000 statewide, is when Trump goes 21 to 24% gain in all of these counties in 2020. These are the so-called suburban women who abandoned Trump, okay? These are the suburban voters who abandoned Trump with record gains on a record new population growth, so tremendous amounts of votes. And in Forsyth County, you may not see it on my slide because I don't want to make it too busy, but in Forsyth County, the Democrats grew their vote share by 80%. So you have a 14% loss in Republican margin in this county. So all these counties are anywhere from 7 to 14% margin loss for Trump with record vote gains in these counties. You're getting Atlanta closer to pull the absentee game by trimming margins in these counties. These are some Democrat strongholds throughout our country.